Okay, well, welcome everybody that's joining us. I'm Jill Hoffman. I'm the director for the White River Alliance, and I'm joined by a couple of my colleagues, Scott and Haley, who work pretty closely on this program we're going to talk to you about today. I was just reminding those that hopped on, if you tell us in the chat who you're connected to, if you're with a homeowners group or a management company or however that looks, that would be helpful to us. And then throughout this 30 minutes we have you, please continue to use the chat as a place to put questions that you might have or information you're looking for. And we will not only try to answer that here today, but also if we can't, we'll get it to the right stormwater administrator for your community and get it answered for you one way or another. Okay, with that, it's 101. So I'm going to just hop over and do a screen share here. And we're going to use some PowerPoint slides today for my portion. And then Scott is going to actually take you live through the website to introduce you to the training program a little bit. So I'm going to kick us off. We've been doing about, I don't know, half a dozen or so of these workshops, and we'll probably continue to do more, but we are recording this one so that we can share it widely. So if you're joining us in person or in the future, welcome. Thanks for giving us a little bit of your time to learn about stormwater, how it works on our landscape, why the maintenance of it is so important to its function. We put this program on as part of the White River Alliance, and we have several member communities that gather underneath our efforts to make sure that we're working together across the region to protect our water supplies. So with that, you see the names of those communities there. So if you're in one of them, that's great. If you're outside of one of them, all these conversations actually still apply to you as well. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to spend about 10 minutes with you in a rapid fire learn about water 101, water quality, water, stormwater, etc. And then make sure you understand the regulations that are in front of you as part of private property infrastructure owners. So why are you here? Water is critical to our future. That is goes without saying. But you might not realize that stormwater is a key part to our water supply and how everything around here functions. The stuff we're going to talk to you about today is related to stormwater best management practices, or something we often refer to as BMPs. So you might hear us use that lingo, but those are best management practices that are on the landscape, and I'll explain a little bit how those work here in just a minute. Those are required by law to be maintained. And so that's what we're here to try to help provide resources to you about that requirement. All right, you may own one of these BMPs. Scott may reference the fact that you own part of a utility later. If they are on your property or you manage them on behalf of an owner, the responsibility for those things to work correctly is on you. But don't be scared by that, because we're here with a bunch of resources to help you understand those responsibilities and help you maintain those. Okay, as a matter of quick background, I think it's helpful to make sure that those of you that are having to maintain these things understand exactly how it fits into kind of the regulatory landscape and also just why it's so important. So stormwater regulations exist as part of the Clean Water Act that was established in 1972, so over 50 years ago. That important federal legislation occurred after things like the Cuyahoga River caught on fire in 1969 and several other sort of environmental calamities. So that fire and those issues were caused a lot by industrial pollution that was discharging to the river through pipes. But what we realized after we cleaned that stuff up in the early parts of the Clean Water Act was that there were still a lot of other pipes coming into those river systems, creating a pollution load that was past the level that was safe. So that introduced a phased approach, and that's what took us to stormwater regulation. Okay, when we think about stormwater, we want to think about when the water falls in the landscape, where does it drain to, so that we can manage stormwater kind of on a basin system or a drainage basin system, something we call watersheds. So the picture you're seeing at the left of your screen is the state's regional watersheds. Those are the boundaries that kind of define what water runs to what river. And if we zoom in and take a look at our watershed here in central Indiana, you can see it's shown here on the map on the right. It includes the White River running kind of through the middle of it all, and then about 15 other primary tributaries. And so I'm going to show you a few more maps of how stormwater comes into this system, just to give you a sense of how it's aggregating and creating a challenge for us. And so hopefully you can remember this map and know that this is what we're doing, is trying to plan across this entire area. Okay, so if we look at that map in a different way, this is showing you all of those industrial pipes or wastewater pipes that are coming back into one of those tributaries or the main stem. You can see how many dots, those are all different pipe discharges. So you can see our watershed and its waterways are on pretty heavy pressure from those releases. And what we want to do now is kind of show you how the stormwater system interacts with all of that other wastewater and how that actually all contributes to our drinking water supplies. So again, my job is just to warm you up to why this is so important and your role. Your role here is to help maintain that private infrastructure. So the picture I'm showing you on the left is just a cutaway that should be familiar to you about how our sewer systems function. I think that's fairly common knowledge to homeowners, that there are sewer pipes that come out of your house and some part of it traverses across your yard and then eventually connects in the sidewalk or in the street with some amount of public infrastructure. And then many times there are cleanouts on those systems, and homeowners often maintain those cleanouts. If you've ever been lucky enough to have tree roots invade those systems, you know there's a maintenance piece that sits here on the private property side. Okay, so that's sewer. If we look at stormwater infrastructure, it's strangely not that different, right? We're funneling stormwater off of our houses and hardscapes into storm drains. And then in many cases, they may run through something called a mechanical separator, which we're going to talk more about in just a little bit. That's designed to kind of swirl out any trash or settle out any big sediments. And then it runs many times into a wet pond or maybe into a different best management practice or BMP. And then eventually either discharges to another pipe system or directly to the stream. So whatever is happening on this private infrastructure really affects the quality of the water that discharges to those streams. And so that's the part of the system we want to make sure that you guys are maintaining and understand and have resources to maintain. So just know that all of this stormwater structure stuff we're talking to you about is part of a much bigger system, and its water quality and quantity really add up in a cumulative way and sort of leave us with some challenges that I'm going to share with you. So here's an example of one subdivision, just so you guys can kind of get your head around what we're talking about in a real landscape. This is a subdivision in Carmel, and each of these yellow dots that you're seeing on the screen are best management practices. Those are the mechanical separators. So those are those units that are underground. You probably don't even notice them. There is a clean out on the top of them, and those things all need to be vacuumed out in order to be able to continue to function when dirty stormwater comes into them. Then you're seeing all these pink or tan colored shapes. These are other best management practices on the property or BMPs. Those could be dry detention, wet detention, permeable pavement, swales, trenches, all those kinds of things. So those also add up and become part of this system and need maintenance. So if we look at what happens once something leaves that Carmel subdivision, I'm showing you now again our watershed basin, and these are all the different cities and towns with these red diamond shapes that are required by law through an agency called IDEM, or the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, to try to get the stormwater pollution cleaned up before those pipes come into the streams, much like the industrial dischargers have to do. So across the 50 cities we have in our basin, if we zoom in and just take a look at Southern Hamilton and Marion counties, you can see that that's about 10,000 storm drains coming into those streams. So that's on top of all those little green dots I showed you with the industrial and wastewater discharges. So you can see that a lot of what's in our waterways is really what we are putting there and what's running off the landscape. So we made this little graphic to help folks kind of understand the percentage of things that change in that water cycle when we move to a development, whether that's a sort of a subdivision type development or a really concentrated urban development like you see on the top right. So we measured water kind of in the downtown Indy area in an undeveloped condition, which is the picture on the far left. Shows you that when there's no development or hard surface on the landscape, we get about 50% of the water to go back into the ground naturally. And as you move up that development continuum, by the time we hit pretty urbanized conditions, we've dropped that amount of water that infiltrates down to about 15%. That leaves us with our first problem, and things we want to kind of just make sure you're aware of, is the loss of critical groundwater infiltration as we put those hard surfaces down. So if when we get into looking at these practices here in just a minute, if you have what they call green infrastructure or infiltration practices, those are designed to try to help overcome this problem, so that we're recharging our groundwater, since we have about 70,000 wells or so in our watershed that need that water. So that's one challenge. The other challenge when we look at stormwater is that 55% that's now running into the drain is coming with huge loads of pollution because it's running across, parking lots and streets and rooftops and yards with fertilizer and all that kind of stuff. So what comes into those pipes is fairly polluted. This next slide here is just giving you a sense of the scale of that pollution. So the streams in our watershed that are shown here in red are already past water quality standards. So they're not meeting the uses that we want to use them for. Particularly, a number of them are impaired for bacteria, which is a stormwater problem. The blue ones either have not been monitored or maybe are in okay condition if they have been monitored. If we look how that compares across the state, you can see this is not a problem unique to central Indiana, but what is challenging is that because we have almost 2 million people in this watershed basin, about 70% of our streams are impaired versus other parts of the state that are about 47%. So I'm going to hand this over to Scott in just a few more slides, but I wanted to give you a sense of why this is so important. If you haven't picked up on that already, that water is also the same water we use for drinking water. And so here you have a picture on the left of a drinking water intake at 116th Street. And this is the raw water condition in the summer. So that green scum you're seeing in there is algae building up from all of that runoff, fertilizers, pet waste, all kinds of things that get put onto our landscape and come into our water supply. What that means is we have to spend a lot of money once all those storm drains hit the water and cause those algal blooms to clean it up, to get the bacteria out, to make it safe enough to drink and safe enough to recreate in. It also presents some challenges, as I mentioned to you, about water availability, because if we're not infiltrating that water back to the groundwater supply and we're just allowing all of it to run off and out of our communities, it's creating a water availability challenge. So some of our stormwater practices need to be maintained specifically to ensure that the infiltration goes back into the ground. So this is just a map of an interesting study, if I spark your interest today, that we did a couple of years ago, looking at availability into the future. And essentially what you can see on the map on the left is that currently most of the sub basins inside our region here have enough water, excess water available. The forecast for that changes dramatically by 2070, and you can see some of those with orange and tan shapes moving into deficit. So that's just a reminder that when you see these stormwater practices on your landscapes, like the one shown at the top left, they're designed with special soils a lot of times or gravel underneath them to get water to go back into the ground. And so maintaining how that system works is important to drinking water because it comes up out of those wells. And then also those wells supply most of our jobs, the water supply they need as well. So with that, I'm going to let Scott talk to you guys about how all of the different landscape practices we've put together a set of resources for you to understand how to maintain those so that we can make sure that we have a sustainable water system into the future. So the things you're seeing in front of you are just some of those BMPs that you might look familiar to you. And we're going to kind of give you hopefully as much help as you need to make sure that the ones that are in private hands are being maintained so that when they hit the city infrastructure, we're in good shape. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Scott to take you through the program, which is why we're really here. Hopefully I did my job and let you guys know why it's so important. Scott?
Hi, everybody. My name is Scott Miner. I help manage some of the programs within our regional stormwater program, along with Jill and Haley. So yeah, there's a lot to this whole water system. It can be pretty intimidating, but that's why we created this program. So hopefully we can help give you guys a better idea of what's out there, what needs your attention, and how you can go about doing it. As Jill mentioned, this is a regulatory obligation. So IDEM pushes that requirement onto our cities and towns to track, map all these best management practices as they're installed, as new developments come online. And this dates back to the early part of the 2000s. And then it's on it's the responsibility of the owner of each of these developments, the owners of these BMPs, to ensure routine maintenance is performed. So as Jill mentioned, we like to use the term, you own a stormwater utility. And we use that phrase to try to impart some of the importance, the critical nature of some of these things. But again, don't be intimidated. The Stormwater Landscape Maintenance Training Program is designed to help you get through some of this. So it will help you determine if you have these BMPs on your property. And so you can do that through what we call O&M manuals, operations and maintenance manuals. We will give you some contacts for local officials. They can help you find your O&M manual if your HOA doesn't currently have that in hand. The program is free. It's online, and it is go at your own pace. So we'll go through all these major types of stormwater management features and the basic maintenance requirements. But if you don't have pervious pavement on your property among your BMPs, then you don't need to watch that video. You don't need to go through that module. We do have modules on the inspection process. We have downloadable material for finding contractors and local officials. And we do like to say this is not a certification process, okay? So this isn't required training. The city doesn't require you to go through this and get some sort of certificate. It is just there to help you, and we think we've put together a program that does help quite a bit. So there are different uses for this. I think most everybody here, judging from the chat, is with an HOA. So we do encourage you to distribute the link and this information to your HOA community. Several other uses you can consider there depending on your situation, but even just getting through some of the first couple modules where they provide some of the context that Jill briefly provided here at the beginning of this talk can be a great help in getting everybody on board with meeting some of these responsibilities. And I think with that, I'm going to take over the share here so I can help walk you through the program itself and how to find it. Okay, can you see my screen there? Need to move some things around so I can see it.
Looks good
Okay.
on this one, Scott.
Okay, so this is the White River Lions website. And this is where you'll find access to the program and the links to get into it, to create an account, get into it. And I think Haley will probably share that link in the chat. So if we scroll down, we have this portion right here with the training. You come here to create an account and here to access the training modules. Once you create an account, you can come back, bookmark this page. You can always come back and access the training modules just by clicking there. Once you're into this Learn Dash platform, let me step back here. This training is hosted on this Learn Dash platform. So it does take you out of our website and put you into this training platform. We host a number of different trainings on this platform. Today, we're talking about the Stormwater Landscape Maintenance Training Program. I think through the registration process, you'll be asked to choose which one you want to do. We've got a status bar to track your way as you go through it if you are required to take the whole thing. And then we get into the modules here. We'll come back to discuss these resources, but I just want to quickly go through some of the training modules themselves. As I mentioned, the first 3 modules provide some of the background and context to this training. So a lot of what Jill covered at the beginning here, we go over in more detail there. Then we do get into the BMPs themselves, mechanical water units, couple modules on wet ponds, since those are a pretty high demand item, dry ponds, green infrastructure and living systems, permeable pavements and infiltration, preservation areas, and then we get into some inspections and compliance issues. The last two modules are some bonus materials we put together. So actions individuals can take on their property to help improve and protect water, our water resources, and then some helpful local resources and partnerships. I'm going to click inside this one real quick because it was put together with our friend Claire Lane at the Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District, and Claire is on the call with us today. So thanks for joining us, Claire. I will just quickly, I'll use this module here to talk about what you get when you come inside here. We do have these video presentations, and they're provided, most of them are provided by the stormwater professionals, the officials with our cities and member cities and towns. This one is with Claire here. They run about 13 minutes. Well, I'm sorry, they run about on average 10 to 20 minutes. There's, I think, one or two that maybe run a little bit longer, but video by video, they're not terribly long. Each of the modules has several downloadable resources. You can get the presentation here, and we can get this manual here, and I'll come back to show a little bit more about that manual in a moment. Each module has a quiz. So if you are required to complete this whole course, you can certify, or not really certify, but you can check your progress by taking these quizzes. It'll give you a little notification that you've completed this module and you've gone on to the next one. And then we can provide proof that somebody has gone through each of those lessons. You can access each of the different modules over here. So pretty easy to navigate around. I'm going to jump back out here, and now we can take a quick look at the resources module. So we have the manual in here. We have contractor lists. So a lot of good information for if you're looking for somebody to help you with your maintenance. We have this gray-green infrastructure primer. So a lot of folks don't understand why we don't just keep piping stormwater into the pipes underground like we always have. So this can help orient people to why we're starting to move towards more green infrastructure. All the modules, PowerPoints are down here to download as well. But let's take a quick look at the manual. So we put this together to track closely with the modules themselves. So we go through a bit of the orientation subject matter here at the beginning, and then we get into each of the BMPs themselves. Each one of them gives you a short description, a list of the maintenance requirements, and some key considerations if you have one of these on your property. Click through these real quick. So next steps, this little bit here sort of tracks with the module 12, where we go over some things you can do as an individual on your property. We have contact information for your local officials. We have things to consider before hiring a contractor. A lot of these BMPs have landscape features that are not your normal landscaping, and they may require a little bit of specialized landscape care. So not all contractors are trained to maintain these features. So we've got a set of questions here to help you make sure you're hiring the right one. We've got contact information for different maintenance providers, ponds, green infrastructure, and then mechanical separator units. Okay, that is the program in a nutshell. Come back out here. We still have about 5 minutes here. We can stay on longer if you like, but we do want to open this up to questions now and make sure from that fire hose of information we just provided, we're giving you something that is useful and something you can carry forward in your community. So I think we've got John with the City of Carmel here to help answer questions of a more technical nature, Claire as well. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys now for any questions you may have. You can feel free to put them in the chat if you want to, or ask them straight away. If there are none and you're just trying to digest all of that information, we definitely understand that as well. It's pretty overwhelming. But again, I think those modules are laid out pretty well to walk you through it.
Liz, I saw you nodding there. As a reminder, you can just take those things at your own pace or just go to the ones that you're interested in. So yeah, I know it seems like a lot, but what we wanted to do is just make sure you guys knew it was there for you. Enforcement is going to step up on these private infrastructure practices, frankly, by necessity. I hope I shared with you why that's the case. We have a pretty big water challenge in front of us as a region. So John may be able to talk a little bit more about what enforcement looks like, but the idea is, and the cities want you guys to have this information to be able to not end up in those situations. So our goal is, you know, at this point in time to help you be best prepared and really get ahead of any challenges that you might face. So.
Jill, I do have a question, and I hope I'm not opening a can of worms on this call, but what is the method, or what's the process when you have a community who is actually on a golf course?
John, I might throw that to you to see if you have any experience. Are you suggesting, Liz, whether the community maintains them or the course itself? Is that the sort of?
Yeah, but
question?
basically in our community, the golf course maintains all of our ponds.
Okay.
So this information might be confusing to the residents because we have no control over the ponds.
Yeah, so the responsibility of maintaining the BMPs or the water quality practices are the responsibility of the property owner or the controlling entity. So if those ponds are on the golf course property and there's no other document out there that says that the HOA is responsible for those ponds, then we would ultimately require that the golf course bring those ponds into compliance if they're not already in compliance.
And how would we know if they're in compliance?
Well, depending on what municipality you're in,
Okay.
but most are going to be requiring private entities to submit annual reports
Okay.
on those. So probably what you'll get, at least in Carmel, what we're probably going to do would be to send out we've been doing education for years, installing these practices for years. But before we step up any enforcement to where we don't, if we don't have a gross violation, if it's just typical maintenance type of stuff, we'll probably be sending a notice out to all the regulated entities and then saying, hey, we have received your annual reports in the past, or we never have. We need to get it in. And then at that point, once we've given some notice and some warning, and we'll then follow up on those. I think our main goal right now is just to make sure they're all getting inspected. And then any maintenance items are noted correctly, and then that there's an action to remediate those. And we know everybody's going to have different compliance timelines and different situations that they're in. So most of us don't want to open a can of worms as well. But that's why we work with the White River Alliance and all the other member communities to try to make it sure whatever we do move forward with is pretty consistent.
Okay. Thanks, John. That's very helpful.
Yes, no problem. If you have any other questions, though, we're available.
Hey, John, just as a clarification, is it possible that there are still some BMPs in the neighborhood part of her development that aren't golf course related, like some of those mechanical separators? Might those be scattered more out in the neighborhood?
That could be possible. Do you know when your subdivision was built?
95.
So 95 is before there was a lot of established regulation for these practices. So depending on what municipality you're in, you may not have a responsibility to report on these. So that's where I would suggest contacting your local stormwater administrator or engineering or surveyor's office to see who has the construction plans. Doesn't own manual exist? Because otherwise we're really just looking for that function of that pond that's existed for years to continue, that we don't block the drainage, that we are maintaining the vegetation in a good way around the pond. We don't have any excessive algae growth in the pond or anything like that. Just that it's being maintained. The drainage ways are open.
Well, our golf course does a really good job because we had a big problem a couple years ago with the cattails along the edge that were just ridiculous. And they've spent many years because those are so invasive and they come back taking care of them. So, but I will check with our city offices and see, we're in Noblesville, so I will check with them and see where we are. And also too, I'll just because how this webinar came to me is through a couple of residents shared with it because they had concerns. And so I just want to make sure I'm not causing more trouble for the golf course because they're such good partners and do a really good job. So I do not want to open that.
Yeah, it's funny, we've had golf courses approach us to renaturalize their ponds that used to be more of the mowed down at the edges. And now they want to, a lot of times they use those landscaping features as part of the course. So we've had good, golf courses don't want to spend more than they need to. So they're actually usually pretty good about fertilizing, to the proper application rates and things like that. So yeah, we've had pretty good luck working with them in the past. So, but if there is a breakdown there, maybe your local officials can help you get the message through. If one is needed, everything may be fine. I don't know. That's why we got to get out there and start looking at these things.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thanks, Ben. Any other questions that we can help with right now? If not, I'm gonna ask Haley to do a couple things. Drop our info at email in the chat, Haley, if you wouldn't mind. If you need to reach back out to us, maybe you already have that from registration, but we can always help and direct you to your local officials. We also have a really cool program called Clear Choices Clean Water that provides a lot of content that you could provide to your residents about what they can do on their individual lots to make sure the water that's running toward those drains is as clean as it can be, or infiltrating some of it even on their own site, so we have less of it ponding up. So that program is in the chat as a link to. Thanks, Haley. And that's a really great thing if you are part of an HOA. We put out, Haley does an awesome job putting out monthly content on different topics, through social media or e-news type blurbs you could use. So if you're trying to help your residents kind of ensure that your ponds and such are cleaner, that's a great program with a ton of resources for individual action. So I wanted to make sure we mentioned that too. And it's just a little minute or two after 1:30. So I want to honor your time. If you need to drop off, that's great. If you want to stick around because you have another question or two, we're happy to hang out for a few more minutes. Otherwise, I just want to really encourage you to go through that program, pick the parts that you want. It's free, it's easy. And just remember that the water that's running off your neighborhood is literally someone else's drinking water. So we need your help. And really appreciate anything you can do to learn more and to maintain these systems.